I'd like to start the presentation with giving you this URL. There's no easy way, just if you got something to write this down on, it will take you to this presentation. So today's presentation is all about the land and the law, all right? We're going to start by looking at legal descriptions. That is how your house is known to the world. And so two people who are sitting here right now told me, I get all confused when I see the southwest quarter of northeast half of the east section 24 town, and all that stuff. So that's one of my goals today, is to have you look at that sort of thing and be able to parse it and figure out what it is. Then we're going to talk about how properties get conveyed from one person or one entity to another. The history of a house from the standpoint of the law is the history of the people who have owned the house through the years. And one of the things that I've found as I've done the work on the houses that I own is you are oftentimes quite surprised to find that some character that you know about or that has some historical significance was once the owner of a property. Then finally, we're going to talk about using the recorder's office. How many of you have ever visited the recorder's office at your local county? How many of you would say, I'm familiar with how to use it to do research on old properties? Because that's the rub. And so as part of that, I spent today earlier talking to the recorders in 2 different counties. I talked to some people who do an online interface to those county recorder information. And later in the presentation, we're going to see some of that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a legal description. And I would tell each of you that if you're researching a property, the number one first thing you must have to do that research is a legal description of your property. And so if you don't have that, you need to figure out how to get that. And we're going to look at some legal descriptions before this is all over with. But a legal description is, from the standpoint of the state of Indiana and the United States of America, that is what describes that unique piece of real estate on the whole surface of the earth. And much of what we're going to talk about today is how those legal descriptions are put together. I wanted to start with this obvious question that most people don't know the answer to, and I don't want someone to say 43,560 square feet. What's an acre? Whoever came up with an acre, and what is the idea? Do you all know about an acre? Anybody have any idea where an acre came from? Well, an acre is, we know that all of our measurements here in the United States came from England, right? And that a foot was somebody's foot, really, at some point back in time. Well, an acre was the amount of land that one horse could plow in one day. That's an acre. And I was astounded to find that an acre was different in Scotland than in England. And an acre was different in England or in Scotland than it was in Ireland. Why would that be? Type of soil. The heavier the soil, the smaller the acre. So an Irish acre, the Irish soils were better. You know about the potato crop in Ireland. Their acres were smaller. Finally, though, it was standardized upon, and we'll talk about that here later on. But an acre is basically, in the English world, that is sort of the basic unit of land measurement. So we measure land in the United States of America according to a system called the Public Land Survey System. And so here are the key points about a legal description. All legal descriptions begin with a set of XY coordinates. That is, there is an up, down, and a side to side. And we're going to see exactly what those are. The basic unit of land measurement in the United States is called a section. It is 1 square mile, 640 acres. An array of 6 by 6 of those sections is called a township. And now it's important for me to make sure you understand that there is 2 sets of townships. There is a legal township which has a number that describes it, actually a set of 3 numbers, and there is a political township which actually has a name, and which you would know. We're in White Post Township right now, right outside of town is Cass Township. You live in Keener Township, okay, and so on and so forth. Pulaski County's unique situation is that for all but one of our townships, all of our political townships are actually also legal townships. So White Post Township is the name of Township 30 North, Range 4 West, and so on and so forth. And we'll learn what all that means here in just a little bit. Each township has this unique identifying number. It includes a range, which is its east-west component. Its north-south component is called the township, and then it has a section number. And in each township, the sections are numbered from 1 to 36. So I have these townships. Each township has an ID. That ID is going to have a section number. Okay, the township has a range and a township number. The sections then inside the township are all 1 through 36. And I have a picture of that, I think, is in the next slide here. So this is a generic township showing you, and this is sort of the thing that you'll see if you look at a map, that all of the surrounding townships sections are marked there so that you can see that my section 36 in one township is next to 31 in the township to its east. It is north of section 1 in the township to its south, and so on. So there is a picture of a township. And each township in Pulaski County looks like that. White Post Township looks exactly like this. The northeast corner is section 1. The southeast corner is section 36. Each one is 1 square mile. Okay, so we got that. So Madeiraville is in section 4, township 30 north, range 4 west. Now obviously those numbers must mean something relative to something. And this map shows you for the whole United States. So each of these up and down lines is called a meridian. Each of these east-west lines are called baselines, and in fact, here's the one for Indiana that we're going to concern ourselves with today. The baseline for Indiana and for Illinois is the same. It's down near Evansville and all the townships. So when I say that we're in township 30 north, how many miles north of the baseline are we here?
300?
180, give or take.
And how did you arrive by that figure?
30 townships at 6 miles per township.
You get a star on your sheet for today. And so far west are we of the second principal meridian here?
We are in the 4th township west.
So therefore?
Well, if we were at the county line, we would be 24 miles away. But
Everybody cool on that?
22 miles away from the meridian.
Exactly, because we're partway into the county. We're not at the eastern bounds of the county. But the eastern bound of the county, Nathan just informed me, is in fact the second principal meridian.
Is there any rhyme or reason to how the surveyors chose where they stuck these principles?
Yes, there was. All of the lines, the meridians actually live on lines of latitude, okay? And it got complicated, and if you look at this map, you can see people didn't wait for this system to be developed. Actually, this system was designed by Thomas Jefferson, all right? And the earliest known use of this system was in 1620, okay? So it's been a long time ago. He expostulated it all, worked it out for the United States, but at the time that he did that, most of what was then the United States, the 13 colonies and Ohio and part of that, had already been surveyed by a separate set of rules called metes and bounds. Does anyone know what that is? Because the old Independence Cemetery, its legal description was done with metes and bounds. And so, for instance, it said, from the big tree that you find 40 rods south of the Bill Miller farm, okay? Well, that tree has been long gone, and so when we started working on the church a few years ago, we had to have a surveyor come out and translate that because the church was laid out in 1830 or 1834, something like that. It was right after this part of the country became part of the United States, and they were still using the metes and bounds systems because the surveyors had not come through yet. Okay. So, this is the part that people find confusing. So for those of you who find this confusing, what we do is we halve and we quarter the sections. So let's do a little math. How many acres are in a quarter section?
160.
All right, how many acres in a half section?
320.
And how many acres in a quarter section of a quarter section?
40.
40. How many and a half of a quarter of a quarter?
20.
Okay, what about a quarter of a quarter of a quarter?
It's too small.
Nope. 10 acres, exactly right. You just keep halving. So you have the 160, or I'm sorry, quarter, from 160 to 40, from 40 to 10. Take half of that, you get 5. So the north half of the northwest quarter is going to be 5 acres. And so here's where I wish I had a blackboard to draw a big square and start doing this for you, because as you come to these halves and quarters, that is the way you're going to find many of these deeds. So you nest them, so the south half of the northeast quarter of the northwest quarter, and this is where if I had my blackboard, we would draw a square, all right? You parse it from the right to the left. I think that's what's in my next slide here. So we take the northwest quarter, so now we're up there. Then we take the northeast quarter of that. So where's the northeast quarter of that? It's up here, and then we take the south half of that. So now we've located that piece, and we know that that piece is 20 acres.
Nested means backwards.
Nested means that you can keep taking quarters of quarters and quarters and quarters.
Like two flags.
Where do I want to go?
One more.
Oh, well, one more back. Okay.
Okay, so you went.
I need to leave this. The south. See, this is where, with a blackboard, this would be. Northwest quarter is the upper right quarter. I'm sorry, upper left quarter.
So we're in the northwest quarter.
So now you imagine you're starting over again with another perfect square.
So now we are at the northeast corner.
So we go up the upper right, and then we take the south half of that. So it was 160 in the first quartering, 40 in the second quartering, and then you take half of that and you get 20 acres. The town of Maderaeville was drawn by a man named Carter Hathaway in 1852. It shows that was all there was to the original town. You can see the name there up at the top. Down at the bottom, the next slide, I actually have encompassed some of this. So one of the interesting things is this: Maderaeville was platted by an entrepreneur from Winnemac named Carter Hathaway. You may also note the interesting thing about Maderaeville. Why is Maderaeville where Maderaeville is? It was where the new railroad, you see it off on the right there, crossed the Pioneer Road from Winnemac to Rensselaer. So there was already a road. This main street right here has been a road since the 1830s. Why would people in Rensselaer want to go to Winnemac?
Land off.
The land office was in Winnemac, and so if you homesteaded anywhere in Jasper County, in parts of Pulaski County, White County, Stark County, you had to go to Winnemac. And so if you looked at the old maps of the counties, you would see these roads that all went to Winnemac, because that's where you'd have to go to register your land claim. And so Maderaeville was laid out by Carter Hathaway. He beat the railroadmen to the draw on that. All the towns south of here, Francisville, Monon, Reynolds, Chalmers, Brookston, were all laid out by James Brooks, the president of the New Albany and Chicago Railroad. And he had intended to lay out a town here, except Carter Hathaway was watching the news, and when he saw where the railroad was going to go through, he immediately came up here and talked to the two landowners and said, let's make a town right there, because a railroad's going to go through right past the Rensselaer to Winnemac Road, and that'll be a great place to site a town. And because of that, they say Brooks would have nothing to do with Maderaeville. They actually platted a little town right on the north side called Belfast. It was roughly where the rest park is north of town, but because Maderaeville had already been here now at that point for 7 or 8 years, Belfast never took off, and so the railroad town of Belfast never made it. Maderaeville took its place. And so that's a little bit about the history of Maderaeville. Now about conveyances. There is something called a chain of title. The chain of title basically is based upon official county land records. Those live at the recorder's office. It's a continuous path through time. Who was the original owner of every single piece of property around here?
Indians.
Well, after that.
Native Indians.
Actually, it was the United States government got it first, okay? Then the United States government, through an act of Congress, would grant that land to the state of Indiana. Then the state of Indiana would pass that on to the individual people who settled the property. But that path must be continuous, and that's one of the points. The summary of that entire chain of title is called an abstract of title. And it used to be that people did that for a living. I have done it as a hobby now for the last 20 or 30 years, and I'm very anxious to help you all to do that as well. So the basics of an abstract: it is a complete record. And when somebody hands you an abstract, that is, when a person whose job was an abstractor, it was a legal document when they would give it to you, this is a true and complete history of this parcel of land from the time that it passed from the United States until the time it passed into your hands. Okay? And it's sort of like a timestamp of that chain of ownership to a given point. And all abstracts, I didn't include that here, all abstracts legally have a date and time as of which they are official, and nothing beyond that time is part of the abstract. That is, when I certify an abstract, it is with a time and date stamp, and I guarantee that to be the true and correct record at that moment in history. But then from that point on, what happens to it is not part of what's covered by that abstract. abstract. And so what I say, and I think this next slide is, that the abstracts were often updated. So each entry in an abstract is numbered. They're all in chronological order. It includes every single thing that had any influence on the ownership of that property. Tax liens, taxes that were accruing, estates if somebody died who owned the property, so on and so forth. And those updates were common, so some of the abstracts that I have will have the original abstract and then an additional abstract added on and then another one added on, and sometimes as many as 5 or 10 different additions that were done to it as the property changed hands. Because the old abstract was an official record, I could start with that abstract and then add what I knew had happened since then, and that, of course, to cut down on the cost and the time it took. So what were letters patent? Because in the general case, that was how land originally passed from the United States to other people. Anybody here know what a letters patent was? The letters patent was basically short for patent. It was where the piece of land went from the United States of America to its first lay landowner. And so for much of the territory around here, there is a place you can look it up online. You can find the original patents for the land that you live on, except I'm going to mention that, whoops, it's a slide coming up. Madeiraville is an exception to that. When we get to that, I'll tell you that. There were no letters patent issued for any of the lands around here for a particular reason. I'll tease you with that reason. Maybe somebody knows the answer. Madeiraville was different. Quite a bit different.
Swamp.
Not the swamp, it was the Wabash and Erie Canal. The Congress of the United States gave huge tracts of land to the state of Indiana for the purpose of maintaining a canal. The state, in turn, deeded that land, conveyed that land to the Wabash and Erie Canal Company, and then it went dramatically bankrupt when the canal failed. And so in my abstract for the old hotel here in town, there's probably 15 pages that deal with the bankruptcy of the Wabash and Erie Canal, where this was canal land, so it wasn't patented to a farmer. It was passed by an ordinance by the state of Indiana that passed it to the Wabash and Erie Canal. I am ahead of myself. So letters patent is one way. A deed is another way, and now we're going to look at some types of deeds. Here's the two most common, warranty and quitclaim. What's the difference?
Quitclaim is just giving you your word. The warranty is guaranteed by a title.
All right.
By somebody.
By the person who signs it. Okay, so if I give you a warranty deed, what I'm basically saying is, with all the power that the law has to bear upon me, I guarantee you that I have the appropriate title and ownership of this property, and I guarantee you when I give you this warranty deed that it will stand against any legal challenge. Now, a quitclaim deed, on the other hand, I could write you up a quitclaim deed right now for the White House. And it would be perfectly legal. I, Brian Capouch, hereby convey and quitclaim to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, and there would be nothing. That would be a totally legal thing. All I'm saying is, if I had any interest in this property, I'm giving it up to you. It doesn't say I have any interest. It just, if I have that interest, you get that interest. And so where you see a quitclaim is where an abstractor would look at the history of a property and say, boy, I don't know. I see that John Doe died and John Doe's 4 daughters all signed off on the land transfer, but his son was living in California and he's not here. So at that point, we contact the son's great-grandson who is left in California, and he sends us a quitclaim deed, and we put that in the abstract of title, meaning if I ever had a claim on this property, I hereby give it up. But that's all it says. It doesn't guarantee anything. So we could all write up quitclaim deeds here for one another's property and give them to one another, and it would be perfectly legal to do that because none of us have an interest, but that doesn't stop us from quitclaiming, because quitclaiming says, if I have an interest, you have it, but if I don't have it, then you got what I got, which is nothing. So never accept a quitclaim deed is the bottom line on that. Some other kinds of deeds you will see that are very common. An administrator's deed is how an executor of an estate will pass the land that they are handling as part of estate administration. A trustee, so St. Joe, when it got the 7,000 acres of Juanita Waugh's land, that was through a trustee's deed. You can also do it by inheritance, and this was the story I was telling you about. One of my houses was owned by a couple named John and Eliza Ann Crouch. They had bad luck. John died when he was 52. Eliza died when she was 53. They had a teenage daughter and 2 young sons. One of the sons went to live with an aunt and died not too long after that from typhoid fever. Another son was killed in an accident. The daughter went on to marry a doctor. She moved to Indianapolis, and I don't know who had the house or what had to do with the house, but many, many years later, oh, I'm touching the button again. Thank you, Mary. Oh my God, I really did it good that time. There we are. See? You can't barely touch that thing. So what happened was that when I finally, and I mean it took weeks of digging through all these property records, I finally found one where lot 28 was transferred. And I look, and it's Mrs. Rollo Bula of Indianapolis, and I find out that she was the daughter. And because she was the daughter, by common law, she was the only heir at law of the couple who owned that property, but nothing was ever done with it. And when I bought the hotel had belonged to a man who died in 1998. And when I bought it in 2004, his family had never done anything with it. So as far as the law was concerned, a man who had been dead 6 years was the owner of that property. Interestingly, by the time that I bought it, 3 of his children had died. So what happens then? He didn't have a will. So what happened is 27 people had to sign off on that deed and quit claim to me before I could get it. It took us 2 months to contact these great-grandkids and stuff who lived in Florida, and it was a fairly large legal expense to do it. By the end of all that, though, basically what happened, this was a brilliant lawyer's idea, every one of the kids and grandkids and great-grandkids quit claim to one single daughter, and then that daughter quit claim to me. So in that case, it was a quitclaim deed that turned out to be okay, but it was because his estate had never been probated. And as far as I know, has never been probated to this day. Now, where does that leave the family? I can't tell you, because you really do need to probate an estate if somebody dies, but they had never done it. And so this was 60 years after the parents died. She's an old lady when she transfers the property, and I just happened to find that entry in there that made me able to do the abstract completely. So I'm going to kick it a little bit here. So I wanted to ask you what a mortgage is. Legally speaking, what is a mortgage? Because
for a conveyance of ownership?
It is a conveyance. It's a conditional conveyance of ownership. So who gives a mortgage?
The bank.
Not a bank. That's the very thing I was fishing for, was for you to say that word. It is you who give the mortgage to the bank. See, you own the property, and I, Brian Capouch, when I take on a mortgage, I give a mortgage to the bank, and what it says is, I promise to pay, and if I don't pay, here's the property you get to sell to get the money out of me. So a mortgage is always, the grantor of a mortgage is the owner of a property. And that is a very common thing for people to be confused about, so I was glad to have you say that. Okay, so here is actually a property legal description. This, for those of you who know the town, is where the garage is down there next to the cemetery. That's all that sits on the property. It's a 2.21 acre piece that sits right next to the cemetery. So it's a part of the southeast quarter of the northwest quarter of section 434. Okay, so if you imagine in your mind that section sitting there, we got to go to the right first. We go to the northwest quarter, that is the upper left quarter, and this is part of the southeast quarter of it. Now, that wasn't enough, and it's kind of interesting to think about this, but some of the pieces of land in the town of Maderaeville are not part of the plat of Maderaeville, even though they're in the city limits of Maderaeville. Maderaeville is very unique in that way, because I own another property as well that's done like this. So somehow I have to uniquely describe that property, so let's take a quick look. So it says this. Commencing at a point on the north line of Main Street, right there's Main Street, okay? Main Street, you're going to find, is 3 rods wide. So we go to that north line of Main Street. Now what's next? 188 1/2 feet east of the southeast corner of lot number 109, as shown in the original plat of the town of Maderaeville with first edition, running thence east and so on. So it makes a box once you find that part to start with. So if we look, the next slide here is in fact the plat that is referred to. That is, and I don't expect you to be able to read it, but this at the courthouse in Miscellaneous Record Book M, page 48, whatever it is the first edition, Maderaeville plat with first edition. So this was registered in 1854, and here is a close-up. There's lot 109, right on the edge of the original plat of Madeiraville. And so what you do is you go to that very corner, you go 188 and a half feet straight east of there, and then go 77 foot north, 120 foot north, and so on and so forth. That finds and locates that piece of property uniquely on the face of the entire earth.
How'd you find it? How'd you find the spike?
How did I find?
Was there a spike or?
No, I didn't actually survey it. I used a survey that was on one of the previous things, because there was a house there, if you remember, there was a brick house there, and when that brick house burned, I had a legal description that they gave, whatever. So I knew that that was part of the description of it, so I coalesced basically 3 or 4 descriptions into that one. So the last part here is talking about the recorder's office. And toward that end, here's what we do at the recorder's office. That's where records of deeds all go. That's where all mortgages are registered. They have separate books for deeds and mortgages. They also have, some counties keep a separate book called their plat book for any platted areas in the county. Pulaski County does not have a separate plat book. They put that in what they call their miscellaneous records book. And so all the plats that you saw so far in this presentation actually came from the miscellaneous book in Winnemac, not from a plat book. But Jasper County maintains a plat book. So if you want to see a plat in Jasper County, you go to the recorder and ask for their book that has all the plats in it. And they did start doing that later in Winnemac. They actually do have many of the plats, but the oldest plats were put into the miscellaneous book at the courthouse. So what else is there? The plats of all the towns and subdivisions. They have other archival information. People don't commonly know this, but anybody can go to the recorder's office and record anything. So some of you I know who know Juanita Waugh, a famous person for Brookston, Indiana. She was the largest woman farmer in the state of Indiana at the moment that she died in 2010. Okay, she owned 7,764 acres of farmland, and she made her tenants every year. They had to go to the recorder's office with their crop plan and their fertilizer plan, and they had to record that at the recorder's office. Now, why would she have done that?
She wasn't very good at keeping stuff organized.
Just the opposite. She wanted to make sure that she absolutely had those farmers under her thumb. And it was like, if you tell me you're going to put corn on that property, and you tell me you're going to buy your fertilizer from Sahagro, and you're going to put on 180 units of nitrogen, damn well better do that, because I've got it right there. The county knows what you've promised you're going to do. So it made it easier for her to do this sort of torture on her land, on her tenants, to make sure that they followed through with their plans, because if they did, so then she had her farm consultant go through all those things. So if you go to White County Courthouse, go to the recorder's office, go back into the 60s and 70s, every single year, every single tenant had to farm, every single plan they had for their farming had to be recorded at the recorder's office.
How much they paid?
$1 a page, whatever it is.
Does it say how much rent?
Oh, no, it didn't say the rent. Nope, all it did was all the crop plans. There were many things. If something wasn't, Juanita Waugh thought it wasn't your business, man, you couldn't pry it out of her with a crowbar. She was famous for her ability to keep information. So other states do it differently. I answered a request from Michigan not too many months ago, and this person was trying to do just what you're trying to do. She had a house and she wanted to research its history, and we find out that in Michigan there was no requirement to register your deeds until like 1958. And so what they told me was, if you have the bad luck of trying to research a property in Michigan, good luck. And a friend of mine in Ohio just wound up telling me that he said there's no such thing as a recorder's office in Ohio. You go to the auditor's office and they keep some of the same information, but he went on to tell me, he said, I've worked in Indiana, I've worked in Illinois, and I've worked in Michigan and Ohio. He said, I'll take Indiana's system any day over any of the others. So you all are lucky in that respect compared to people who are in other towns, other states. Indices. So that's your magic thing once you get there, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then they also keep miscellaneous records, and for that, many affidavits. So what happens is, one of the things when you're abstracting is, my place was built by a man named Josiah Lowes Porteous, all right? And there's a deed from him that he signed, J.L. Porteous. That doesn't get it. So what has to happen is there is an affidavit that was filed in the miscellaneous records at the Benton County Recorder's Office, and it is a person who basically in his affidavit says, I, so-and-so Perkins, have lived in York Township, Benton County for the last 40 years, and I'm well acquainted with Josiah Lowe's Porteous, and I know him to be the same J.L. Porteous who signed the deed that transferred this property to so-and-so on such and such a date, and further, the affiant saith not. That's how all the affidavits end. And basically, so what they had to do is, when the abstractor was chasing down a property, if the name wasn't spelled exactly the same, okay, how many John Joneses are there? How many Bill Smiths are there? Well, Josiah Porteous wasn't a common name, but the same rule applied. If there was any little difference between this document and that document, somebody had to testify that they knew that was the same person. So the miscellaneous book is filled with affidavits of people where the person simply used his name different ways or went by a name that wasn't his given name, on and on it goes. And so you also in there have the plats of all the towns and subdivisions. And most counties are now putting their records up online. The two main service providers are called DocsPop and Tapestry. I've got some screenshots of each. I went to Tapestry last night. So this was what Tapestry gave me was, if you don't mind, we'd like your credit card number and we're going to charge you $30 before you do a search. And it doesn't tell you anything more than that about it. You want to know what you just put in? Give us $30. I'll pass. Okay, so this is White County, Jasper County, I believe Newton County. Benton County and Pulaski I used DocsPop, and there's where I did a search in Pulaski County for John Schultz, and it turned out that this search came out. Notice that I'm looking in the original plat of Madeireville. It has a beautiful search interface, but, so let me show you a little more, and then I'll tell you a little more of a story. So here was where I searched for my name. And here's all the properties. This is not all of them, but this is some of the properties I own, just to show you what it returns. In the left-hand column is a link to the exact document. So if you click on it, you get to see the document. Shows you the county, the date, what type. So warranty deed, mortgage, warranty, mortgage, and so on. Who the parties were is in the middle there. Always the grantee is on top, the grantors are below. The next one is what the legal description is. It shows you a partial legal description. If you click on the link there, it gives you the full legal description, and then you get to see a little preview of it. They only show you this little narrow thing. You get to see about 3 lines of any document because there is a state law that requires the recorder to charge money to print those documents. And so as you scroll down through these previews, they're watermarked. They have a big thing that goes across the side that says, you may not print or otherwise convey this because state law requires you to pay for it. So you can print it right from this screen, but it's $2 a page. If you instead get the document details off to the left, take that to the courthouse, then it's $1 a page. Okay? And so I'll talk about that in just a moment. We're just about out of time here. I want to be done by 8 with this to do some other stuff. So here's the plan. You're going to need a full legal description of the property to do this project correctly. So there's multiple ways to find the legal description. Okay. If you get a property tax bill, it has your tax ID number, it's going to be 66-something. That will lead you to the full legal description. The full legal description will be on your deed after the words to wit. All deeds are basically use the same exact thing. It will say, I, Brian Capouch, an unmarried male of Benton County of the state of Indiana, hereby convey and warrant to Mike Teedy, a single male of Pulaski County, Indiana, the following real property, to wit, and there follows the property description. And that all deeds must by law have that legal description on the deed. It will always be at the top. It will always be after the little introductory paragraph, and it is always introduced by the words to wit, which means here is exactly what it is. Basically, you're going to take your legal description and you will find, here's a couple of things to guard for. Sometimes the legal description will be the same all the way back through time. But in the example of my place in Benton County, Josiah Porteous, he died, his wife dies, his son moves into the house. His son and his wife. His son has a heart attack when he's 64, all right? And so he leaves a widow, they built a little national home, or had one built right next to the big house for the widow to live in, and then the son moved into the big house so he could take care of his mother. So all of a sudden, my legal description at that point in 1964, whoop, now this single parcel becomes two parcels, one that belongs to the grandma, one that belongs to the son. And so it's little dodges like that that make this a little bit more than just going there and rolling out of bed in the morning. You have to be kind of creative about it. There's three parts to transferring a piece of property. You have to have a deed with the seller and the buyer. Then there has to be a notarized acknowledgement of that deed. So I write the deed and give it to you. It is not in effect until it becomes notarized in what they call acknowledged. And an interesting, very, very, very interesting aspect of this is that you may know that Indiana is a common property state. So if you are married and you purchase a piece of real estate, automatically your spouse owns 50% of it. That is, you are co-owners of it. And so and I have this all over the place. In the old days, the acknowledgement is a separate thing from writing the deed. And in some of these acknowledgments, it expressly says that the wife acknowledged the deed separately and out of hearing of her husband. See, because the husband would come in and sell the property, but the wife is a 50% owner of the property. And if dad's sitting there looking like that when mom says, yeah, I acknowledge that deed, but she really didn't, you know. So they had to separate the husband and the wife, and then the wife by herself, out of sight of her husband, would say, yep, I'm intending to sell my interest in that house as well. Okay, and so both parties. So another thing that happens plenty, which you should be aware of, is that for a variety of reasons, most often having to do with legal things involving debt, oftentimes a husband would have the wife be the owner of record for a property. So all of John Crouch's properties, every single thing, his farms, his store properties, his home, everything, were never in John Crouch's name. They were in his wife Eliza Ann's name. And the only time John's name showed up is when they sold something, because he's half owner. His name would be on the sale deed, but on the buying deed, it was only in her name. And my suspicion is, I don't know, that he had debts that he didn't want people to be searching for John Crouch and find them when they searched for his name, so they'd never see John Crouch's name in any of the deeds of acquisition. They'd only see it when he sold a property, and at that point they couldn't attach it. Somebody get the other end and head yonder way.
I gotta earn my keep.
So if this is all okay, you're heading down that way, and you should wind up at the very end of the block.
You want to measure it from the building corner?
I'm standing right here. This should be it.
Alley's usually, or sidewalk is usually part of the street and not the block.
We'll find out in a minute by measuring. And then we'll figure out what these other little things are along the way.
Where did you get this?
I bought it on eBay. Uh-oh, we're tight. And I paid a big money for it because this is an antique. It came from England. The device was invented in 1620. It is called a now I'm going to forget. It's named after the guy who invented it. What? Okay, so right there, he should be, wherever I am, there's 4 rods. So now what are these marks in between? There should be a total of 4 rods, so we should see quarter marks on this somewhere. I'll bet this is 1 rod.
Yeah.
No, look. See, this has 3, this has 4. Oh, so it's rods. These are rods. So there's 4 rods. No, 4 what would it be then?
It's not rods.
2, 3, 4, and then
16 and a half. What's a quarter of 16 and a half?
I know each link is 7.92 inches.
1, 2, 3,
What in the world?
3,
3.
2,
1, 2,
Okay.
3.
So are there 4 of those that have 4?
and then that's the center,
5.
and then 4, 3, 2, 1.
So this is 2 rods, and that's 2 rods?
7, 8, 9.
Let's see what happens if you drag that down to the end of the building. Assuming that the corner of the building, let's see if that matches the corner over here. Sure does.
Yep.
So that's what it is. This is the edge of the block right here. The sidewalk is on the street, just like you said.
The history nerd, but I'm the urban planning nerd.
Okay. Anyway, I just think this is cool as could be, and you...
Marquee is about your point.
Okay. So there wasn't any space between the north and south boundaries of the lots. They were tight up against one another. So that should wind up, you should wind up right at the edge of that sidewalk.
Either we're off by a foot or they put these poles on the property and out of the...
Poles go in the alley.
Take this to the alley.
So if you go to the end of the alley should be one rod exactly. And then we'll measure the street, which is supposed to be...
Brian, I think I just figured something out.
What's that?
So we have these markers that look like they're there's 10 equal ones.
Right.
I think these are our rod markers, the triangles.
Okay.
One rod.
All right. There's a triangle.
2 rod?
Yep, that's what it is. Don't you guys wish you had one?
How you don't have anybody else to run the other end? I have to get a friend.
Imagine running these in the mountains or in the woods.
Oh, so this
Of the
triangle.
Yep, that's your one rod mark. So that's 16 and a half feet from the other one down here. And then see if we take this across the street, we should wind up with 1 rod sitting on the sidewalk and 3 rods for the street. Yep. So there we are. I'm right at the edge of the sidewalk. Is there a marker near the edge of that sidewalk? Within a bit?
Actually, I'm looking at the wrong side.
Oh, all the way to the edge of the building. All right, that's right. That's right. So right about there should...
And there it is.
Okay, so we got it. There's our 3 rods.